them to kind of join in with us. Get some water.
And I know you have your 2 girls. Do you have any other children?
My oldest, my son, is a coach.
Oh, okay.
In the area. And then I have a middle daughter. So you met my oldest daughter and then my youngest daughter, and then I have a middle daughter. And it's so funny that my 2 oldest daughters both married in the same year. Okay, I see Dorcas Curry has joined us.
Great.
And my daughter-in-law, Christina Matthews, has joined us. But they got married within the same year, and then they basically have gotten pregnant in the same year.
Oh.
And both of them are due about 3 weeks apart.
Oh, fun.
So
that's
one
great.
is with her first child in September, and the other's due in October.
Well, yeah. And does your son have kids?
4.
I thought you had said that you were a grandmother, but then when I was talking with Jewel and April the other day, I thought, I don't think that these are the ones who have kids yet. So that's what made me think of it. Okay. Wow. Well, you're about to expand your brood.
Yes. Yeah.
That's great.
And so I'm thankful for that, and just asking the Lord to just help me to just be prepared for all the blessings he's going to give. So and then my parents live here in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they're both in their 80s. And so we all kind of stick close together.
Yeah. Great.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm seeing a few more folks joining us now.
Terrific.
So we can go ahead and get started. It's no telling, maybe people are on a schedule. We want to keep them on that well. But I'll just start off by welcoming you to the Virtual Christian Book Club. I'm the host. I'm Evelyn Tinsley. And today we have Amy Julia Becker with us. And I want to just acknowledge that we have chosen her book, White Picket Fences, as the book of the month for June. We'll kick that off on June 15th. And today we are just so happy to have her here to kind of talk about her book and anything else that she has on her mind, actually. And I'll just give a brief introduction. But basically, Amy Julia Becker is an author. She's a speaker. She's holding down a podcast, one that's Small Talk and one that's Love Over Fear. And I think you just finished up Love Over Fear this season with a study of Philippians.
That's right. Yep.
Right. Yeah. So I was able to listen to that on my walk. So, it really gives me a lot to think about. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And as a speaker, you've spoken for the Festival of Faith and Writing and Q Conference. You have 3 books so far, maybe 4, maybe you're giving birth to the 4th one.
Right. Yes.
And so you got White Picket Fences, Small Talk, and A Good and Perfect Gift, which is a wonderful story about your daughter, Penny. And so I really look forward to reading that one as well. That's on my agenda. And you have your website, amyjuliabecker.com.
Yeah.
So if people want to know more about you, they can go to your website. And so I see Jewel has joined us, and Cheryl Ford, Brittany, Christina, and Dorcas. So welcome, everybody. Let's see. So I don't want to rush through everything, but I do want to try to get in at least some of the questions that I have. So what I want to do right now is just give you a moment to tell us about yourself in your own way.
Well, yes, I'm Amy Julia Becker, and most of my days are some combination of writing, speaking, thinking, and taking care of a household with 3 kids. So you mentioned our daughter Penny. Penny's 14 now and has Down syndrome. So that first book that you mentioned was written about the spiritual journey that really God took me on and my husband on after Penny was diagnosed with Down syndrome, and thinking about what it meant for us to receive her as a gift. Then she's 14, my son William is 11, Marilee is 9. And so especially the past couple of months, that has meant that we've had a lot of time together. We're up in Connecticut, where we've had, stay-at-home orders really since March. Those have just started to lift. And we live on the campus of a school. My husband's the headmaster of a boarding school here in Connecticut. Real involved in our church. We live in a little town. I also grew up, though, in North Carolina, which comes up in White Picket Fences. And I was in Edenton, North Carolina. I was born there and raised there until I was 10 years old. So it was actually a very formative time for me, even though it was now many years ago. And I do a lot of thinking and writing and speaking about race, disability, privilege, culture. I have a master's of divinity from Princeton Seminary. So there's a, kind of biblical and theological take on most of what I think and read and speak and write about as well. So I hope that gives a little picture of me.
Very good. Thank you. And I will just share a little bit of how I came to know Amy Julia. Given the Virtual Christian Book Club, one thing that I took some time to do was to kind of get to know some Christian authors. And one place that I love to go to do that is the Festival of Faith and Writing website. And that is actually an event that's held about every other year. And Amy Julia has spoken there in the past. I think you were on the schedule for this year, but due to COVID-19, it was postponed. So hopefully you'll be back on again for next year. But I was prompted once I found you there, in a sense, to go and find out a little bit more about you. And so I went to your Facebook page, I went to your website, and I was just like really excited, number one, to find out that you were from North Carolina. So that was kind of this connection, because I'm in North Carolina. And but also a lot of what I think maybe your view of the scriptures, I can't really put my hand on it, but they really resonate with me. And I really wanted to reach out and kind of get everybody else excited about you the way I've been excited. And so but there was also this feeling with me that maybe people won't be interested in that right now. Maybe they will feel like it's, why are you making an issue of this, or, something like that. But honestly, when the news came out and people began to talk about the issue and what happened with George Floyd, it was just kind of like it sealed the deal for me. I'm like, no, we got to use this book. We've got to, use this as a maybe jumping off point for more conversations in that. And it's an excellent just foundation for us, I think, because it's the fact that it's so Christ-centered. So that's how I came to know Amy Julia. Now, let's see, what would you say is your favorite Bible verse?
Every day of the week, I might give you a different answer. But when I'm thinking about White Picket Fences, the verse that truly has so the book came out actually in 2018, so a year and a half ago. I worked on it for many years before that. But especially when I was going out to start speaking about the book, and I was nervous about that, scared maybe even, and I really was asking God to give me a way to pray. And what I came to, or God gave me, was the prayer from Ephesians chapter 3, where I learned looking at Ephesians, it's really a book about what it means for the Jews and the Gentiles to be one family under God. Like that was the major social division in the early church, was the Jews and the Gentiles. And so this was a book written, and it says the mystery of the gospel is that we are one family. So it's like, this is the big reveal. God has been doing this mysterious work for all of history. And I think that is so relevant to our day and to our church. Like the mystery of the gospel is that we are one family in God. And this prayer is Paul's prayer for the Ephesians at the end of kind of explaining that mystery, where he says, for this reason, I kneel before the Father. This starts in verse 14, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he might strengthen you with power in your inner being, so that Christ might dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, might have power together with all the saints to know how wide and high and long and deep is the love of God, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you might be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. And then he concludes by saying, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, be glory to Christ Jesus, for now and forevermore. So that long prayer, I literally memorized it, as you can tell, and I just prayed that before anywhere I went to speak about this book, that I would be rooted and established in the love of God, and that would be what was both protecting me and also opening me up, right? Like that you can have, when God is the one protecting you and you don't have to defend yourself, right, then you can stay open, because, and so my heart could be open to what people have to say, even if it's critical, but also just to learning and to admitting my own blind spots and weaknesses. And then also if I'm rooted and established in God's love, then I don't have to worry that I'm going to run out of love for people if it's coming from God, right? Because that's an endless supply of love. The love I have on my own, it's pretty small. It will run out, right? But if it's coming from the Lord, then I can continue to give it away. So there's so much I could say about that passage, but it really has been this deeply meaningful and empowering series of verses and prayers for me, especially through these past couple of years with this book.
Right. That's excellent. And I can certainly relate to that. I know a few years ago, I kind of started out just focused on love, just focused on wanting to understand more about the love of God. And it's so funny that by the time I settled down and kind of began to pull everything together, I concluded that abundant life begins where fear ends. And that focus to me was what Jesus kind of opened the door with when he talked about the thief that comes in to steal and to kill and destroy. But he came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. And I didn't, part of you, kind of like, very research type way wants to be like, well, I need to understand more about fear and what fear does. But I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to know more about abundant life. I wanted to know about what Jesus had for me. And so, that's kind of been my journey, and the journey when I have an opportunity to share with others, that's what I share with them. So I can certainly relate to your journey as well. Now tell us a little bit about the title of your book.
Yeah, so the title, White Picket Fences, it was a long process, and a writer friend of mine actually suggested it. Like, I don't even remember, I had a long list of possibilities, but I really liked it because I felt like it conveyed this image of usually kind of like suburban America, where, this kind of iconic image of 2.2 children and a 4-bedroom house with a garage and a fence out front, which again, there's not anything that's wrong with that, but there is a sense of maybe homogeneity, like everybody being the same and having the same expectations for their family. And then a fence, what a fence does is it protects and it sets a boundary that can be a good thing, but it also can be a way to divide and to keep people out. And I think in thinking about the way, not just whiteness, although that's a big part of the story, but like whiteness, wealth, education, ability, all these different identity markers can cut us off from one another. And in my case, one of the things I write about in White Picket Fences being feeling actually stuck behind a wall or a fence of privilege, of social advantages that have cut me off from other people, that I didn't even recognize for a long time. And so White Picket Fences felt like a way to suggest some of those things without, spelling it out in more obvious terms. And then the subtitle, I hope, says a little bit more. It's turning towards love in a world divided by privilege. So that's meant to be a little more descriptive of like, this is a book that hopefully is moving people, certainly describing my journey from fear towards love, from division towards connection, from shame towards hope, those types of movements. And that is my hope for this book, and for especially people who are Christians, to be able to be on a journey of forgiveness, confession, I guess should come first, confession, forgiveness, reconciliation, and then to your point, abundant life, like fullness of life, right? I mean, what this is, and I love what you just said about you didn't want to study fear, you wanted to study love. And I was just thinking about Jesus's words. I think it's Jesus who says like that perfect love casts out fear.
That's it.
So if you're focused on love, it's going to like get rid of fear without you necessarily even meaning to. Whereas if you focus on fear,
that's right,
even if you're trying to get rid of it, you'll probably get sucked into it more, So I think that's really beautiful.
Right. Yeah. And I even feel like, when it comes to fear, we have a tendency to kind of huddle together with those that we actually share the same fears with, which just kind of deepens it for us, and so to me, it's really important to broaden, your view and broaden your connections. And again, that was one reason why I was really happy that you were, willing to kind of meet with us and allow us that, that opportunity. I'm not someone of privilege from a wealth standpoint. But and I don't want to give away your book, because you definitely deal with, some really wonderful things about privilege. But I do have some privileges on a spiritual standpoint. And so I don't want to give that away. You all have to read the book and understand that a little bit more. But I really enjoyed reading everything that was in here, and I think everybody will really gain a lot from the book. And so if you have not ordered your copy yet, all you have to do is go to amyjuliabecker.com and put in your order, and you'll be ready to go. I think my sister even found the audio version. So yeah, so, and I love audiobooks.
And I am not the person who reads it, but I have been told that the person who reads it does a good job. You know how sometimes you don't like the voice of the person reading the book. I also found out today that both Amazon and Barnes and Noble are out of stock right now of the book, but it's available at Nav Press, which is my publisher, and at Walmart right now. So just if anyone's looking online and finding it and of course Kindle, if people read online, that's also a way to get it.
Okay, well, I'll get back in touch with you to make sure everybody can find a copy, and that's a good problem to have if they start running out. So that's a good thing, but we certainly want to make sure we can all get a copy. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today? Those were pretty much you've kind of covered my questions and the things on my mind, but is there something else you'd like to share with us today?
I think just that it's really encouraging to me that we are having this conversation, you know, that, and I have had multiple conversations over the course, especially of these past 3 weeks, with both white people and people of color. And I think sometimes we forget the humanity when we think too much about these identity lines. And I don't mean by that we all should be colorblind or we should not, you know, but more just, I love connecting with people, especially people of shared faith, through that sense of our common faith and our common humanity that I think can free us up to learn about our differences, to celebrate diversity, to recognize different gifts and different needs. So I guess all I wanted to say is just that I'm encouraged by this conversation with you and by the thought of having different groups of people across the country reading this book right now and engaging, you know, because my story is very much my story, but I hope other people can find a way into it, either because they really relate to it or because it's like, gosh, that is so different from my experience and this helps me understand someone else, right? I think that's what books can do. There's actually a chapter in the book called Mirrors and Doors, right? That some books are reflections of ourselves and help us to kind of understand ourselves, and other books are doorways into a different community or a different life that also can help us to gain empathy and understanding. So I would hope that that's the case, but I certainly feel like conversations like this contribute to that work as well, and I'm just grateful to be a part of it. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And the only reason I'm not going into any more depth about it is just because, you know, I really want everybody else to be on board with it and have an opportunity to read it. And maybe we can all get together at some other point and kind of talk a little bit more about it. But I don't want to spoil it for anybody. So, and have you thinking, well, you know, Evelyn just told us everything about it, so I don't have to read it. So that's not the case. Go ahead and read it, and we'll talk about it at a later date. Now, I did want to just put out there, if anybody, I can see the chat that's going on, if you have the chat room on Facebook. So if you have questions for Amy Julia, she can certainly answer them at this point.
Sure.
Maybe there was something that you think, well, Evelyn didn't ask her about X, Y, and Z, and I would have asked her about that. So if there's something that anybody that's listening in now wants to ask, please go ahead and type that into the chat if you have any thoughts on that. But I'm just glad to see everybody that has joined us so far, and that we're hoping that this is a blessing to you. I know it has been a real blessing to me, and it just kind of, I don't know, for me it's kind of like the Lord is he just specializes in the impossible, and there's things that just do not seem possible to us. It is so good to know we can hand those things over to him, and he can make them possible, even though we cannot figure it out to save our lives. Okay, so we have a question from Brittany Dent. Brittany is a life coach and a teacher, and she's asking, did Amy Julia observe any racism growing up in North Carolina?
Great question. The short answer is yes, although as a child and as a white child, I don't know if I don't think I had the word racism when I was growing up. So this would have been the late 70s and early 80s. I did, one of the things that I learned later on in my life was the difference between what I think a lot of, at least white people, think of as racism in terms of overt negative words and actions from white people to Black people. And I did not observe that as a child. I have come to see that racism is different. That, sure, that's an example of racism, but there's also racism, especially in the ways that the structure of our society has been built. And I've participated in that as a white person for my whole life. So for example, one of the things I talk about in the book is learning after we moved away from Edenton that I had gone to a school, which I loved, that was founded because of desegregation. and that gave essentially a way for white kids to keep going to school together. And I was devastated when I found that out, to think of the fact that this place I loved, it gave me a good education, good friends. There were lots of lovely people there, but the only Black people who were at my school were Mr. and Mrs. McSwain, the janitors. And they also were lovely people who I knew by name. But still, there was just this sense of, oh my gosh, like I grew up participating in segregation, literally. And the same was true on Sunday mornings. Another scene that I write about in the book that was just like really stayed with me for my life. As a little girl, I was watching a movie where there was a church scene, and there was a Black man sitting in the pews of this church alongside a white person. And I asked my mother why he was there. And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know that Black people and white people could go to church together, because I knew there was a Black church and a white church. And so I just didn't know that was like a thing." and my mom, who came from Connecticut, and my dad's best friend from college was Black. So I think she didn't know how to handle my question as a kid. At least I don't remember her being able to say anything other than, of course, Black and white people can go to church together, but she couldn't give me like a bigger understanding of what was going on, or of the decisions they had made as far as what it meant to live in their town. And those are just a couple of examples of, I would say, I wouldn't have known to call it racism, but I was participating in these longstanding structures and systems that led to a lot of inequity between white and Black people in our little town, but also, of course, that was like forming and shaping my view of the world and of myself, and of other people, that I do think was ultimately racist, even though it didn't come out through, hateful words. It came out through very passive acceptance of the status quo.
Right. Right. Very good. Thank you for that. And let's see, we have another question from Dorcas Curry, and I'm going to read it as she's put it here, and then we can talk about that. How do you explain cultural differences in religion versus racial differences in religion? Or is there a difference?
I have not ever thought about that question before.
Right.
So it's interesting when you think about like church history, right? Because we have so many, even before the Protestant Reformation, there were already branches of the church and different expressions. You had the Orthodox Church and you had the Catholic Church. And then, of course, now 500 years of churches splitting off from one another because of worship style, or because of theology, or because of race. I mean, there have been lots of different reasons for church splits. And it's really interesting to look back. I'm actually reading Jamar Tisby's book right now, The Color of Compromise, which is a look at church history in America through the lens of race. And one of the things he brings up over and over again are these churches, which it's almost ironic. It's like they had so much in common in terms of theology and worship, but just especially on the side of the white Christians, an inability to understand, therefore we should be worshiping together. And of course, if we're worshiping together, then we also should be going to school together and working together and treating one another as fellow children of God. And so instead there were these splits. And so you can find in both the Black church and the white church a lot of cultural similarities within denominations, right? Like you can find charismatic Black churches and charismatic white churches, and you can find much more kind of reserved or reformed Black churches and white churches. That said, I have a group of friends who, were both white and people of color, who moved into a neighborhood in Richmond, Virginia, where they were invited to move in, which was predominantly African-American neighborhood. And a Black pastor and a white pastor together started a church there. And they said, theology was never the problem, never. But like, should the children stay through the whole sermon? How long should a church service be? what does music look like?
Mm-hmm.
Not the words, not the theology behind the music, but how do we worship together? Those were the hard issues for them. So they were more cultural, but they tend to divide upon racial lines. And that was, I mean, it was a good, has been, I mean, it's still going, this church, but a good experience of recognizing we're not disagreeing about who Jesus is. We're not disagreeing about baptism, the Lord's Supper, you know, right? But we are, but at the same time, the cultural ways in which we've worked out what it means to go to church on Sunday morning or afternoon or whenever it is, that's where a lot came up. So the last thing I'll say is we went on a trip with our kids and traveled to a lot of different churches around the country, both predominantly Black and predominantly white churches. And there were lots of differences, of course, in style, but I also was struck by that, like, there's so much, you know, we say the Lord's Prayer, we take the bread and the wine, right? There's so many things that actually do carry from church to church that our kids who've grown up in a teeny little white church in Connecticut could go to a Black Baptist church in Alabama and know what to do. Like, oh yeah, this is familiar. These are my people, right? Like, as Christians. So I hope that there's hope there for us, not to like water it all down and make it all look the same, but to actually like learn and grow in the fullness of what it means to be the body of Christ together.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know how I would explain cultural differences, but I do recognize them. I have worshiped in predominantly white congregations, predominantly Black congregations, and there is a different way that they operate. You know, they're you know, they are led a little differently sometimes. I would say culturally, probably the music, you know, and the singing styles kind of vary a little bit there. I can appreciate both. I can really appreciate both, but sometimes people draw a hard, fast line between those, you know, and actually make them right or wrong.
Right.
And I don't know if that is the way to go forward with that, but those are some things that are definitely challenges in terms of culture. So I don't see. Oh, so, and then Brittany just mentioned that yes, Sunday is the most segregated time in the South, unfortunately, and it still remains that way. So even though I do know of congregations that are very intentional about making sure that everyone feels welcome, and they have been, I would say, successful in that. And so maybe in the future we won't see so much segregation. And then Dorcas just says, thank you. To some degree is the reason, let me see, I'm sorry, I'm messing that up. I'm thinking that is to some degree the reason for some church segregation. Okay, so she was just referring back to her question about cultural differences, that those things are kind of creating differences between us.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just one other thing, I've thought a lot about that, because I do think it's grievous when Christians are separated by one another. At the same time, I think it's also totally fine to express our worship in different ways, and to want to be with people who you're able to worship alongside easily. But what I've thought a lot about, and I think also that the reason we have such segregation among races on Sunday mornings does have to do historically with white Christians being unwilling to worship with Black Christians. And that is on us. At the same time, for white churches to all of a sudden say, hey, come be with us, is not helpful, right? Like, that's patronizing. It undoes, I mean, the Black church has been a source of strength, of safety, of resistance in a very powerful, good, godly way for many centuries. And to dismantle that would be, I think, to lose a really important part of the history of the church in general. And so I think that means that we need to be asking the question of the Lord, what does it mean for us to come together and, yes, to shed the racism and the injustice that has led us to this place, but not to shed the beauty and the power that has emerged among your people in this time, right? And that's not an easy, I don't think there's an easy solution. The one thing I will say is I do think looking for ways, even outside of church walls or Sunday mornings, for predominantly white and Black congregations to be collaborating in efforts to care for their cities, to pray together. Let's paint a mural together to bless our downtown. Let's build a house to help in some underserved communities. Let's get together and pray against violence in our city, or to pray for revival, or whatever it is. I think there are ways that we could come together without trying to completely rework Sunday mornings, and certainly not start there, but come together, build friendships, trust each other in our relationships with the Lord, and caring for our community and having a shared common cause. That's where I think we could start in trying to find a way forward.
Right. I agree, and I follow you on that. That was a conversation my husband and I were having. That definitely not beginning with worship, but just the fact that we can work together. We can decide on something that we'd like to accomplish together and work on those things, and kind of come together in humility to accomplish something together. So that's really important. So anyway, those were really good questions, and I appreciate that. You kind of made me think a little bit about something I was reading some time ago, and right now I can't recall the exactly where I was reading it, but just in the past that back during the day of segregation, that the churches were mixed at some point, that Blacks and whites worship together, but a lot of time within the church, the Blacks had to sit, I think maybe in the balcony, away from everybody. And when, somebody decided, well, we're all brothers and sisters, surely I can come down here and sit. And they were told, no, you can't, and kind of kicked out. And so those things, did occur. And so, it's that type of thing that we don't want, that type of feeling and that type of, just kind of blatant, I can't worship with you, that does not show the love of Christ in us, I believe. And let's see. And I just wanted to read Dorcas's comment. I agree. The big part is not to judge others when it's cultural differences and not doctrine. So yeah, and just recognizing that doctrine, if we focus on that, that's actually going to unify us, and so that's the strength of that. So those are all the questions and comments that I'm seeing today. So I think looks like we're at the end. Yeah. So I again just appreciate you being here and taking time out of your day to spend with each one of us, and just kind of really appreciate that. And just want to see if you want to close us out in prayer.
I would love to. Thank you for having me. It's a gift to be here, and I'm honored that you've chosen White Picket Fences to read, and I'd be happy to, talk with people again along the way or at the end or whatever. So let's pray. God, thank you just for this conversation, this new friendship. I do pray for Evelyn and for those who are going to be reading White Picket Fences together, that you would use it as a way to have conversations that lead towards healing, towards blessing, towards that abundant fullness of life that Evelyn was mentioning earlier and that you offer. I pray it would be a way that you use to turn us from fear and towards love, that we would be people who are rooted and established in love, that love would be both protecting us and opening us up to one another and to the work that you want to do within us. And we pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you. It looks
You.
like some folks are just joining us, so I'm sorry. You're going to have to listen to the recording, but we are going to end this right now. And thanks again. And don't forget to order your book. All right.